What if the man everyone called weak was the only reason a whole family slept peacefully at night for 9 straight years? And what if the moment he finally stopped, they didn't even notice he was gone until the silence started screaming? A ring hits a wooden table. Soft thud. Final. 7 years, undone in a single gesture. Siren Holloway stands across the room, spine straight, voice level, like she's reading the terms of a contract instead of ending a life. She says he's always been a shadow, always tired, always there for other people's misfortune, never for their joy. No malice in her tone, no tears, just a small tilt of her head, like she's explaining something obvious to a slow child. 12 people stand around that room, and not one of them knows the truth. Not one of them knows that for years, this man had been quietly bleeding out someone else's curse just so she could close her eyes at night and actually rest. His name is Ian Ravenlock, last of a dying house. And right now, he's staring at his own ring finger. There's a pale strip of skin there, thin, precise, like the mark a rope leaves after you've held it too long. Around him, the room holds its breath. Siren's mother stands with her back rigid, already almost smiling. Her father warms a glass of wine by the fireplace, unbothered. The maid freezes mid-step with a tray in her hands. And by the window stands Cameron Ashton. Golden hair, calm face, the kind of man for whom all of this feels as natural as breathing. Ian listens to Siren's verdict and says nothing, because he's remembering. For 3 years, she hasn't had a single migraine. For 3 years, she's slept without nightmares clawing at her. For 3 years, she's woken up light, humming to herself in the mornings. And not once, not a single time, did she ask why he turns pale by evening, why his hands shake after every visit, why he's had a dry, rattling cough from October straight through spring. The answer is older than either of them. The Holloway bloodline carries a curse, heavy, ancient, smelling of wet iron and burnt wormwood. And since he was 14 years old, Ian has been quietly drawing that curse out of her, night after night, into himself. That's what his grandfather did before him. That's what his father did until it killed him at 43. A line of cursed men, silent vessels for someone else's pain. And no one has ever written a single ballad about them. Ian could end this right now. He could tell the whole room that without him, Siren stopped sleeping within a month. That the migraines come back sharper than before. That her voice cracks on the high notes she's so proud of. That Golden Cameron, for all his charm, cannot carry what's lived in Holloway blood for 300 years. He could say all of it and watch her face crumble in front of everyone she loves. Instead, he bows, briefly, dry, the way a man bows when he's leaving someone else's house for the very last time. He walks past the maid, past the door with the carved birds he'd called his own for 7 years, and steps out into the garden. The rain hits him immediately, cold October rain, and something in his chest lets go. Not pain, not anger. It's like a string he pulled taut at 14 years old and never once loosened, not even at night. Finally snapping, he breathes in. For the first time in 9 years, his chest fills all the way, and it aches from disuse. At the gate, he presses his palm against wet stone and watches the pale mark on his finger darken in the rain. And he thinks not of Siren, not of the wedding that will never happen, but of the North, of the Coldford garrison, sitting right on the border of a dying land called Holgrave, of villages people are fleeing in the middle of the night, of wells turning foul, of children being born with gray eyes that have no pupils at all. Nobody up there knows him as Siren's fiancé. Nobody knows him as the last Ravenlock, or as a shadow. Up there, he can simply be a man who knows how to lift a curse. And for the first time in years, that feels like enough. By morning, he's already packing. 3 rooms, a library, a stable holding a single tired horse. That's what's left of the Ravenlock name. He pulls his grandfather's herbarium out of an old chest, heavy, leather-bound, scrawled with for generations of notes in the margins. His own handwriting comes last, neater, quieter, like he's trying not to take up too much space even on paper. Into the travel bag it goes, along with candles, salt, thread, 3 skeins of wool, and a handful of rusty nails from the pantry. Junk, by any ordinary standard. But without it, a Ravenlock is just a sick man with a headache. His horse, Dimmock, gives him a look that clearly says he'd rather stay home. Ian tells him they're heading north. Dimmock snorts. Ian decides to call that consent. As they ride out through the gate, he doesn't look back once. And that's harder than anyone would guess. Behind him is the garden, where he used to read every summer, and the graves of his father and grandfather on the hill behind the church. But memory isn't a chain that has to hold you in one place. You can carry it with you and still keep walking. The road north cuts through 3 counties, fields, and that smell of ale and wet wool. And the world changes a little more with every mile. Green fades into gray. Grass withers before its season. Trees bend with twisted trunks, as if invisible hands are dragging them toward the ground. Ian recognizes the smell not with his nose, but with his skin. It tingles at his fingertips. Iron settles on his tongue. 200 years ago, a queen tried to curse an entire enemy army in a single night and failed. The curse she made didn't vanish. It sank into the earth instead, and it has been spreading ever since, quietly, without a single hero noticing. The crown keeps sending brilliant young warriors north with gleaming swords. They kill the monsters that crawl out of the corruption. They earn medals. They go home to parades. And the land underneath keeps rotting. Because you cannot cure a disease by only killing the symptom that finally shows itself. On the 6th day, in a nameless village of 3 houses and a well, an old woman warns him not to go any further. It's a bad place, she says. The children are sick. The livestock is dying. The captain up there is a good man, but there's only so much one good man can do alone. Ian rides on anyway, because somewhere past that warning is exactly where he's needed. 7 days after leaving the Holloway house, Coldford finally comes into view at dusk. Stone walls, wooden roofs, smoke curling from chimneys under a low-gray sky. Ian closes his eyes for a second and feels the curse hanging over the town, ancient, layered like the growth rings inside a tree stump. Each ring is someone's scream, someone's death, someone's fear, pressed permanently into the stone. The guard at the gate barely looks at him. They send smart elects like you every 6 months, he says, and they all leave within 2 weeks. Ian tells him he wasn't sent. He came on his own. The guard studies the pale face, the dark circles, the tired horse, the bag stuffed with what must look like junk, and shrugs him through the gate. The room above the herbalist's shop smells of dried mint and dust. A narrow bed, a table, a window facing the street. That's the whole world now. The shopkeeper's name is Eileen Marsh, 26 years old, a weather-beaten face, sleeves rolled to her elbows. 3 pennies a week, she tells him. Breakfast downstairs, and if he makes noise at night, he's out. Ian says he's quiet. She gives him the kind of look people give you right before a diagnosis, then nods and leaves him alone. That night, the earth hums beneath him, steady, low, like a toothache that refuses to quit. In the morning, Eileen pours him tea with a bitter aftertaste, and he asks if she added St. John's wort. She has. He tells her it dulls the skin's sensitivity to damage, and in a place like Coldford, that's dangerous. She goes very quiet and asks how he knows that. His grandfather taught him, he says. Something painful moves behind her steady eyes, but she only says she'll keep it in mind. Ian walks the town that morning, past barracks and a blacksmith and a tavern, until he reaches the infirmary at the end of the street. Inside lies an 8-year-old girl, pale, almost blue, breathing so faintly it's barely a flutter. A broad, stone-faced man sits beside her, not looking away for even a second. This is Captain Holt Barrow, and this is his daughter Maya. Unconscious for months while every doctor in the region shrugged. Holt asks who Ian is. A curse breaker, Ian says, and asks to see the girl. He holds his palm to fingers above her chest and feels something thick, cold, smelling of wet earth and old bone. Not sickness, not weak blood. A curse, buried deep, older than her whole short life. He asks for cat fur, a rusty nail, and salt water from the well by the east gate, not the west one. Holt looks at him like he's lost his mind, then goes and fetches it anyway. Ian winds the fur around the nail, soaks it in salt water, presses it to the girl's chest, and begins to pull. No light, no incantations. Just a man with his eyes closed, his face turning gray, minute after minute after minute. By the 30th minute, he can't feel his own left hand. By the 40th, the taste of blood fills his mouth. He swallows it and keeps going, because tearing a curse out fast means part of it stays behind and grows back deeper. The last layer finally peels away like a scab lifting off a wound. The nail in his hand has turned black, not rusted, black, and the water in the bowl smells like a swamp. There's an old mass grave under the barracks, Ian tells Holt. Right behind the wall, Maya's bed backs onto. That's where the rot has been seeping through for years. Holt doesn't answer. He's staring at his daughter, who is breathing easier already. Ian's legs barely hold him up as he walks back to Eileen's shop and lies down, hands shaking. The taste of someone else's near death still on his tongue. By evening, Maya Barrow opens her eyes and asks for bread. Holt Barrow, who didn't cry at his own wife's funeral, weeps in the infirmary hallway with his back turned to the wall. By morning, the whole town is talking about the pale stranger with the rusty nail who did what every healer from the capital couldn't. Eileen brings him breakfast with no St. John's wort and tells him Captain Holt has asked for his name 3 times already. Ian can't remember the last time someone brought him a meal simply because he'd helped, expecting nothing back. He says thank you, and his own voice sounds strange to him. For 3 days after, his body pays the price it always pays. Joints aching, head splitting, the ceiling crack above his bed becoming the only thing he studies for hours at a time. On the 4th day, back on his feet, for different people stop him on the street before lunch. A sick father, a cellar going foul, a boy who screams every night in his sleep, a garden with an evil spot no one wants to touch. Ian starts a notebook that evening, names, addresses, urgency, children first, then the elderly, then livestock, then land. Working one house, one well, one crack at a time, he clears 6 homes, 3 wells, and 1 mass grave inside of 3 weeks. And he realizes, standing on a hilltop looking out at dozens of dying villages, that this is only the very first layer of something enormous. He needs eyes he doesn't have and hands that aren't his own. On his 10th day, deep in a too quiet forest, he finds a woman crouched over a blackened, corrupted fox. Her name is Ren, a scout, and she's been finding dead animals in the sector all week. More than ever before, something is opening up, fresh and powerful, not the old rot seeping from below, something new. They walk the corruption together, marking for fresh points on Ian's map. And by the time they part ways at the gate, he's already thinking in lines that all point toward one direction, northeast, toward Holgrave. The next morning, a mug of hot water sits waiting by the shop door. No note, no explanation. Just Ren, already gone before he can thank her. For 2 weeks straight, Ren guides him through villages he never would have found alone. And every evening the 3 of them, Ian, Ren, and Eileen, compare notes at one small crowded table. It isn't an army. It isn't an order from the crown. It's 3 people and 2 maps, and somehow, for the first time in his life, that feels like enough. By the end of the 3rd week, Captain Holt invites Ian to his home for the first time. Not his office, his home. He pours the drinks without asking if Ian wants one, and tells him that Maya draws maps of cold fur now, red dots for danger, green for where Ian lives. Holt says thank you, one heavy word, and Ian sees in his eyes the exact same weariness he sees in his own mirror every morning. The next day, they find the mass grave under the barracks exactly where Ian said it would be. Old bones, unmarked, forgotten for generations. He works 3 hours pulling the rot out through nails and wool and salt, and by the end he's shaking so hard Eileen has a blanket ready. Before he even makes it up the stairs, the bones are reburied outside the walls with the proper ceremony, and Maya waves to him across the courtyard like he's someone worth respecting. She starts visiting the shop every afternoon after that, drawing, asking questions no child should already know to ask. Why is the earth sick? Why do nails turn black? Can she become a curse breaker too? One day, Ian gives her a smooth river stone, her first tool, and tells her a stone from running water turns cold near a tainted spot. She clutches it like it's made of gold, and looks at him with a kind of trust he isn't sure he's earned. Watching from the doorway, Holt goes back to his study that night and writes his first letter to the king in 3 years. It doesn't go to the chancellery. It goes straight to the crown, naming Ian Ravenlock as the reason a dying garrison finally has hope. 5 weeks in, a letter arrives, and Ian recognizes the seal before he even reads his own name. Siren Holloway. He doesn't open it. He locks it in his travel chest, between the herb book and the spare nails, and goes back to work like nothing happened. That week, Cameron Ashton rides north out of the capital with an entourage of 12, a white horse, and a title as the kingdom's golden hero. He's already killing monsters in Westmore County to cheering crowds, while ballads are written about him in real time. Ian tracks the news on his map, and finds that every beast Cameron slays sits directly above one of the underground channels. He's already charted. The monster is only the symptom. Cameron kills the symptom and rides on, leaving the real wound wide open underneath the celebration. 3 days' journey later, Ian and Ren stand in that same village Cameron just saved, quietly finishing the work the hero never noticed needed doing. Ren tells him flatly that this is going to keep happening, and that no one is ever going to know his name for it. Ian says he doesn't need them to. Ren says she does, that she doesn't care one bit about his modesty, because people deserve to know who is actually healing their land. In the 2nd month, Ian stands over a well in the village of Grey Ash, staring down at water gone black as ink. The grass around it is dead for 10 paces in every direction, the ground gray, dry, crumbling under his boots. This isn't a spring. It's a fault line, a crack pouring corruption up from the depths in a torrent instead of a drip. 30 layers, he tells Ren, maybe more, and if he tries to take it all at once, he'll die trying. Eileen packs bandages and food for a week without being asked, and when Ian says she doesn't have to come, She just gives him the look that always ends the argument before it starts. The three of them set up in an empty house on the edge of the village, and the work begins. Day 1, the first layer, thick with the taste of old blood. And by the end of the hour, Ian can't feel his own hands. Day 2, deeper, a layer smelling of wet earth and old bone. Someone else's buried fears soaking straight into him. Day 3, 4, 5, one layer every single day, his body shutting down a little more each night. On the 5th night, he wakes in the dark to find Eileen asleep in a chair beside his bed, head tilted back, and something in his chest finally breaks open. For the first time in his entire life, he cries not from pain, but because someone chose to stay without being asked. The 6th day brings the last layer, the oldest, and it doesn't smell like rot at all. It smells like snow that never melts on a mountaintop, and inside it he catches flashes that aren't his own memories. A woman, a crown, a voice raised in song, and a second voice, quiet, answering it. He tears the seal loose and collapses, blood pouring from both nostrils, and the well water below finally runs clear. On the 7th day, the entire village lines up silently at the door where he's resting, leaving bread, honey, dried fish, a child's wooden horse, and not one of them knocks. Ian sits on the steps staring at it all, unable to stand. Because in 23 years, no one has ever given him something for nothing. For 10 days after gray ash, his body simply refuses to work. Joints swollen, cough returned. The price of a Ravenlock's blood written plainly across his face. Eileen has already read the truth in his grandfather's herbarium. Dates of death across 6 generations, none of them past 52. On the 5th day of his illness, a woman walks into the shop like she's used to grander doors, and introduces herself as Lyra Wyndham, companion to a deaf, half-blind baron, exiled north out of boredom and disgrace. She's heard about the curse caster keeping records nobody can read, and she waits for hours in silence just to see him. Ian shows her 3 scattered notebooks, his grandfather's herbarium, Wren's scrawled maps, and Eileen's notes, and asks her to turn it all into a single ordered book. Lyra takes one look and calls it chaos. He says he knows. She says she needs a month. He tells her she can have as much time as it takes. 3 days later, she returns with 12 contradictions found, and a working structure already sketched out. More organization than 6 generations of Ravenlocks ever managed on their own. Toward the end of the 3rd month, a woman in a gray habit sits waiting by the gate before dawn, eyes closed, hands on her knees, and doesn't move until Ian himself comes to find her. Her name is Hanacho, a nun from a southern order called the Silent Chalice, and she says she can sense him like a fire burning through fog. 2 years ago, her convent burned to the ground, torched by a cult calling themselves the Singing Ashes, who don't want the ancient rifts sealed at all. They want them opened, and they've been waiting 200 years for someone with exactly Ian's bloodline to walk close enough to use. He is, she tells him plainly, a beacon, and the cult already knows it. That night, 5 people crowd around one small table: Ian, Eileen, Wren, Lyra, and Hannah. And for the first time, this feels less like a shop and more like a family stitched together out of separate wounds. Hannah adds one more piece before the meal ends. The cult doesn't just want the rift open. They want to unleash the original curse a long-dead queen tried to cast, using Ian himself as the living vessel to aim it. In the 4th month, 12 horsemen in white cloaks ride through the gate at dawn, led by Sir Alden Marcroft, commander of the Order of the Bright Blade. He offers Ian everything a fading noble house could ever dream of: gold, a title, protection, laboratories in the capital, all in exchange for one signature. Every word out of Marcroft's mouth is technically true, and every word is also a leash dressed up as a gift. Ian says no, one word, quiet and steady, and watches the commander's gentle smile crack for exactly 1 second, before it seals itself back shut. The Order has already sent 23 heroes north in 10 years, Ian reminds him, and every single one of them left. Marcroft rides south with a bow and a promise, and everyone standing at that gate knows perfectly well this isn't the last they'll see of white cloaks. That evening, Holt sits down across from Ian and tells him, flatly, that if the Order tries to take him by force, the whole garrison stands in the way. In the 5th month, Siren Holloway arrives alone, without servants, without an entourage, on a horse nearly collapsing from exhaustion. Ian sees her before she sees him, and feels her curse from 20 paces away, back where it belongs now that he's no longer standing beside her. Her migraines return 3 weeks after he left, the nightmares a month after that, her voice cracking on notes it used to hit clean. A 3rd healer finally asked her the one question no one else had thought to ask: whether there was a curse caster somewhere near her, and everything fell into place at once. She tells him she hasn't come to win him back, only to say she finally understands what she took from him, and to leave. For the first time in 14 years, Ian tells her everything. Why he started, what it cost him every single night, and why the wound was never her leaving Cameron. It was her never once asking. She cries silently, and he doesn't move to comfort her. Because for once in his life the truth is allowed to simply stand between two people, without being softened. He tells her to stop before she reaches her horse. He doesn't forgive her, not yet, maybe not ever. But if she wants to do something real, she can stay. Not as a bride, not as a guest. As a student learning the voice her own bloodline has forgotten how to use. She turns around and says yes. Winter falls over Coldford in a single night, and Lyra finishes the first volume of the Ravenlock Book of Knowledge. 32 sections turning 6 generations of scribbles into something anyone could learn from. Hannah teaches Ian that the southern nuns and the northern vessels were always to halves of the same craft, one absorbing, one guiding, split apart by 2 centuries of history. Siren studies without complaint, hands raw from cold water and unfamiliar work. The shell of her old beauty slowly wearing away into something plainer and far more real. One evening Ian hears her singing alone in an empty house, an old Holloway lullaby, and feels the very air tremble around her voice. While sorting her grandfather's oldest papers, Lyra finds a letter 100 years old, and brings it straight to Ian without a word of warning. It's written by the very first Ravenlock, addressed to his son, and it says the unthinkable. The Ravenlocks and the Holloways were never victims of that ancient curse. They were the Queen's willing accomplices, one house providing the vessel, the other providing the voice, both fully aware of what they were helping to build. When the curse broke loose and sank into the earth, the Ravenlocks took the blame and agreed to fade quietly into history, while the Holloways simply erased the whole story and lived to centuries of spotless nobility. Ian sits with that letter and finally understands why Siren's curse always felt like his own. It is his own. 2 houses bound by the same 200-year-old crime, one remembered as pure, one remembered as cursed, both equally guilty. He gathers everyone at the table and tells them the truth, and Siren goes white as the snow outside the window, realizing her whole family built its name on a lie. When the silence finally breaks, she's the one who speaks first, saying the 2 houses made this wound together, so the 2 houses have to be the ones who close it. Ian looks at her, really looks at her, for the first time not as an ex-fiancée, not as a student, but as someone who just made a real choice. He nods, and the plan that follows isn't framed as heroism, or atonement, or revenge. It's framed exactly like Grey Ash, only bigger, the same work, the same patience, the same price. Just on a scale none of them have ever attempted before. They set out at the start of the 6th month, 6 people this time, Ian, Ren, Hannah, Eileen, Lyra, and Siren, leaving Holt behind to hold the garrison. Before the gate, Holt tells Ian only one thing: come back, because Maya is waiting. Maya herself presses a smooth river pebble into his palm, the very one he first gave her, and tells him it's for good luck, and that he has to return it. He pockets it, small, warm, heavy with everything it means, and walks north without looking back. 3 days through marsh and snow and villages growing poorer and quieter with every mile, the corruption thickening with every hour that passes. By the 2nd day, his gums are bleeding. On the 3rd, they see it. Not a pit, not a crack. A whole plain where the earth has simply stopped being earth. Snow melts in midair before it can touch that ground, the grass at its edge black and stiff as wire, the trees standing bare and white like bone. At the center, the earth itself is split open, and cold steam rises from the cracks, smelling of wet iron and something faintly sweet underneath it. Ian feels something inside his own chest answer the plain. Every curse he's ever carried resonating with the wound in front of him. Hannah confirms what he already suspects. He is the beacon, and sealing this will take everything he has, and maybe more than that. They make camp at the edge, where the campfire's flames lean strangely away from the fissure even though there's no wind at all. Ian doesn't sleep. He lies there feeling the earth pulse beneath him, slow, heavy, like something enormous and sick breathing in its sleep. In the morning, 12 black-robed figures step out of the fog, faces hidden behind masks, not one of them showing skin. Their leader says he's been guiding Ian here for 2 years, seeding new corruption on purpose, killing foxes, cracking wells, all of it built to lead him to exactly this spot. The dead foxes Ren found, the fresh rifts opening across the mark. None of it was chance. It was bait, and Ian walked toward it one village at a time. The leader offers him the same choice his ancestor once made: unleash the curse, become a weapon, end a 200-year war in one single stroke, and finally be remembered as something more than a quiet vessel. Ian feels the pull of that power reaching for him like a magnet finding its match. He says no. The leader doesn't look surprised. He raises a hand, and 12 figures step forward at once. Ren draws her knives before the first one finishes moving. Small black creatures start crawling out of the widening cracks. The last spawn of a wound in its final agony, and the fight that follows is short, brutal, and one-sided. Holt arrives at the last possible moment with soldiers he couldn't stop himself from bringing, and cuts down the line right alongside them. The cult's leader stands alone at the end of it, an old poison face beneath the mask, gray eyes without a single pupil left in them. He says the rift can never be sealed, that the earth is sick forever, that Ian will die here for absolutely nothing. Ian tells him a curse is not the answer to a curse, that a wound this old doesn't need another weapon. It needs to be healed. The old man laughs, dry and hoarse, and walks away into the fog, and Ian lets him go. 6 people and 10 soldiers stand at the edge of a plain that has been in pain for 2 centuries, and no snow is falling yet. Ian walks to its center alone, the ground warm and rumbling under his boots like a heartbeat coming from somewhere far to deep. He takes off his cloak, folds it, sets it on a rock, and pulls off his gloves, looking at his own hands like he's seeing them for the first time. Then he turns and finds everyone already standing exactly where they need to be. A circle built the same way he'd build an amulet for one specific person, one specific place. Ren and the soldiers hold the outer ring, blades ready, faces calm and clear. Hannah kneels in the second ring, palms flat against the frozen ground, already carving an invisible channel deep into the earth before he's even knelt down himself. Lyra sits at the third ring with the manuscript open, quill in hand, ready to write down every single detail, so that none of this dies if he does. Eileen stands close behind him, hands already resting on his shoulders, warm through the fabric. The same hands that ground herbs and held a wet cloth to his forehead through every fever. Siren stands directly in front of him, pale, upright, fingers laced together, preparing to sing the voice her bloodline hasn't used properly in 200 years. Ian looks at each of them in turn, and realizes not one single person here was ever supposed to be standing in the circle. They chose it, every last one of them with their own 2 eyes, wide open. And slowly, he sinks down to his knees on the warm, humming earth. His palms press flat against warm stone, fingers spread wide, and the curse hits him immediately, like boiling water thrown across bare skin. He doesn't pull his hands back. He feels the whole rift at once, vast, bottomless, a well plunging hundreds of feet straight down into 2 centuries of unbroken pain. The corruption pours out of it like a river that has never once stopped running, poisoning water, earth, grass, animals, and people without pause. He begins pulling it through himself, layer by layer, sending it downward instead of inward, back into the ground where it came from instead of into his own body. The first layer is thin, almost gentle like a film across still water. The second is thicker, tasting of iron on his tongue. By the 5th layer, his shoulders have started to cramp. By the 10th, his hands are burning, and the fingers on his left side have already gone numb. Hannah guides the flow from 20 paces away, her palms carving a channel through the earth so the corruption drains straight down, instead of spreading sideways into new ground. Without her, all of this would simply spill out and poison land that's still clean. Siren begins to sing, quietly at first, an old wordless melody, the very same one her ancestor used to cast this curse 100 years ago. The curse recognizes the voice instantly, the way a dog recognizes its old master after years apart, and something inside the rift shudders in response. By the 20th layer, blood is running from Ian's nose in a thin, steady line, and he swallows the salt taste without slowing down. By the 30th, Eileen's grip on his shoulders tightens, holding him upright through tremors running the whole length of his back. She knows exactly what will happen if he falls before this is finished. Everything he's drawn out so far will surge straight back and kill him in a single instant. By the 40th layer, he's stopped counting altogether. He is no longer a person pulling a curse. He is a single narrow channel through which 100 years of a dying land's pain is finally allowed to pass. Every death moves through him. A child with gray eyes who never once saw his own mother's face. A woman coughing blood by a well she never lived to see clear again. A man who buried 3 sons and walked into the forest and simply never came back. His temples are turning white, strand by strand, and he doesn't see it happen, he only feels it. Something leaving his body that isn't blood and isn't strength. It's time. Years of his own life, spent the way every Ravenlock before him has always spent them. One layer at a time, without complaint, without applause. He thinks of the pebble in his pocket, of a promise made to an 8-year-old girl standing at a gate, and he keeps pulling. Siren's voice grows steadier with every passing minute, no longer cracked, no longer trembling. Full and clear for the very first time in her entire life. She isn't singing for herself anymore, and she isn't singing for an audience. She's singing for the wound her own family helped carve into this land centuries ago. Small, shapeless black creatures begin crawling out of the widening cracks. The plane's last agonized spasms, and Ren cuts them down without wasting a single movement. Step, strike, step, strike. Holt stands in the outer ring beside her, sword raised, defending a man who in half a year has done more for his land than every hero the crown ever sent him. Far behind the hill, Maya waits with 2 soldiers, a river pebble clenched in her small fist, refusing to cry. Deeper and deeper Ian sinks into the rift, past the dirty, murky upper layers, into something colder and pure, a curse in its very first, primordial shape. This is exactly how it was made centuries ago. One voice, one vessel, a queen and her 2 hands working together on a night that never should have happened. And there, finally, at the absolute bottom of it all, he finds a core. Not shaped like a stone at all, shaped like light, cold, white, and utterly ancient. It resists him instantly, clinging to 200 years of habit, to stone, to rock, to the very bones of the land itself, refusing to let go. His left arm goes fully dead from the shoulder down, hanging useless at his side. Dead like it belongs to somebody else entirely. He pulls with only his right hand now, and blood runs from both nostrils, from his ear, filling his vision with a slow red haze. Eileen doesn't speak in sentences anymore. She just says his name, over and over, quiet and steady, like a metronome refusing to skip a single beat. Ian. Just Ian. Ian, again, softer. He clings to the sound of it, to the exact way she says it, plain, unhurried. Like she's simply calling him to the table for tea, not calling him back from the edge of dying. He thinks of Ren's dry silence, of hot water left on a doorstep with no note attached. He thinks of Lyra's sharp mouth softening the moment she saw 6 generations of chaos finally turn into something whole. He thinks of Hannah walking 2 years across 2 continents, carrying grief that never once made her cruel. He thinks of Siren, 3 steps away, singing the very voice that started this 2 centuries ago, now trying to help him end it. He thinks of Maya's small fist closing around a river pebble, waiting behind a hill for a promise to be kept. The core gives an inch, then resists again, harder, like a root refusing to leave soil it's grown into for 200 years. He pulls harder, and something inside his chest screams in protest. Muscle and bone stretch far past anything a body should survive. Siren's voice climbs, higher, purer, and the note lands directly on the core like a key finally turning in a lock, built 2 centuries ago just to receive it. The curse shudders. It recognizes the voice. It recognizes the vessel. It recognizes, at last, the 2 houses that made it in the first place, returning after 200 years to finish what they started. For 200 years it has waited, not for an enemy, not for a hero, but for exactly this. The 2 hands that built it, coming back to carry it home. Ian isn't pulling it toward himself anymore. He's pointing it downward, deeper, back to wherever it was first torn from. Not into a person this time, into the earth itself. The core begins, impossibly slowly, to let go. Slowly, reluctantly, like a stone finally sinking into dark water. The core releases its hold on 200 years of stolen ground. It sinks deeper, quieter, further, until Ian can no longer feel it at all. And the earth sighs. Not a metaphor, not a figure of speech, an actual, physical release. Like a chest finally allowed to exhale after holding its breath for 2 centuries straight. The constant rumbling beneath the plane stops completely. For the first time since a queen sang a curse into the ground 200 years ago. Silence falls, true silence, deep and clean, with no taste of iron left hanging in the air at all. The small black creatures stop crawling out of the cracks entirely, and the last few simply crumble into dust on their own, without another blade needed. Ren sheathed both knives, slowly, one after the other, left, then right, and watches black dust settle quietly into fresh, undisturbed snow. Ian opens his eyes to a world gone completely crimson, then pink, then, gradually, ordinary again. He looks down at his own hands, black, scorched, the skin cracked open along every line of his palm. But they are still his, and they still move when he asks them to. His left hand hangs limp at first, then a finger twitches, then another, slowly waking up like it's coming back from somewhere far away. Snow begins to fall on the plain for the first time in 200 years, and it doesn't melt in the air anymore. It settles, soft, white, and completely ordinary. Ian doesn't stand up like a hero. He simply sits down on the frozen ground, legs refusing to hold him, snow gathering on his shoulders and across newly whitened temples. He runs his right hand through his own hair and feels it, coarse, stiff, changed. Gray at 23 years old, the price every Ravenlock pays with his own body. And now it's finally his turn to pay it in full. Eileen kneels down beside him on the frozen ground, not in front of him, beside him. and drapes his cloak back over his shoulders without a single word wasted. Her fingers fasten the clasp at his throat the way you dress a child, plain, practiced, unhurried. Like this is simply the next small thing that needs doing. Rin steps closer, knives already sheathed, and looks down at him with an expression he's never once seen from her before. Quiet, unmistakable pride. Lyra closes the manuscript on its final page, blows the ink dry, and presses the whole book against her chest like she's just finished the most important work of her entire life. Hannah kneels with both palms flat on ground that no longer burns her at all, and smiles the way people smile after a very long journey finally ends at home. Siren stands 3 steps away, exactly where she's always stood, and waits. Because for the first time she truly understands that whether he calls her closer is entirely his choice to make, not hers. Holt lowers his sword at the edge of the plain, face wet with something that isn't snow, and cries openly for the first time in 10 hard years without a shred of shame. Ian pulls Maya's pebble from his pocket, smooth, round, still faintly warm from her small fist holding it tight, while she waited behind the hill. He thinks of her standing at the gate tomorrow, back straight, serious, hands behind her back, waiting to hear that he kept his promise. He thinks of Eileen pouring tea without asking, no St. John's wort, just quiet company at a table that's always a little too small. He thinks of Ren's dry jokes, and how she got angrier on his behalf than he ever managed to get for himself. He thinks of Lyra, who turned a lifetime of scattered scribbles into something that will outlive every single person standing on this plain. He thinks of Hannah, and a monastery that no longer exists, and how proud her old teacher would be to see this wound finally closed for good. He thinks of Siren, 3 steps away, no longer the girl who called him a shadow, but someone who chose, over and over, to earn a place she once threw away without a second thought. He doesn't know yet what becomes of the two of them, and for once, that uncertainty doesn't frighten him at all. He knows only that it's his choice now, fully his, and that alone feels like the truest kind of freedom he's ever known. He thinks of himself, 23 years old, gray at the temples, hands scorched, a body aging faster than it should, and he finds he isn't afraid of that either. The men of his family never lived past 50, and he doesn't know if he'll reach 40, or 35 or further, but he knows the years left are finally completely his own. Not spent as a silent vessel for someone else's pain. Not spent as an invisible groom waiting to be noticed. Not spent as a shadow standing quietly at the edge of somebody else's happiness. Just his, on his land, with the people who chose to stand beside him without a single order forcing them to. He tries to stand, and his knees shake on the very first attempt. Eileen takes his right arm. Ren takes his left. He takes 1 step, then a second, then a third, each one a little steadier than the last. Not because his body is healing, but because every single step is leading him home. They cross the plain together, 6 people and 15 soldiers, walking over ground that has felt snow for the first time in 2 centuries. Not knights in shining armor, not heroes from any ballad ever written. A herbalist with her sleeves still rolled up, a scout with 2 sheathed knives, a nun with black prayer beads around her neck, a chronicler holding a manuscript against her chest like it's a child, a singer with red, exhausted eyes, and a curse caster with gray temples, walking not toward some duty he owes the world, but toward the exact place he actually wants to be. For the first time in his life, both of those directions point to the same spot on the map. Snow keeps falling, quiet, even white, settling over their shoulders and their hair and the long line of footprints, stretching out behind them. Maya waits beyond the hill, exactly where she was told to stay. And when the group finally comes into view, she doesn't run. She stands with her back straight, hands clasped behind her, the way she's practiced standing at the gate every single time she's waited for him before. Holt reaches her first, and for a long moment neither of them says a single word, just holds on. Ian catches Maya's eye across the distance, and even from far away, he can see she already knows. The way she always seems to know things before anyone tells her. The walk back to Coldford takes the better part of a day, snow falling steadily the whole way. The world around them somehow quieter than before, cleaner. Ren walks a little ahead, scouting habit too deep to break even now that there's nothing left to guard against. Lyra keeps one hand pressed flat against the manuscript the entire way, like she's afraid the ink might somehow undo itself if she lets go. Hannah walks with her eyes half closed, murmuring something occasionally in a language none of the others recognize, words that sound unmistakably like gratitude. Siren walks 3 steps behind Ian, the same careful distance she's kept since the day she arrived at his gate asking for nothing but the chance to earn something back. Eileen walks beside him, close enough that her shoulder brushes his whenever the path narrows, saying nothing, needing to say nothing at all. Ian thinks about tea. Not glory, not a crown, Not a title finally offered by the capital after 6 generations of waiting for one. Just a mug of hot tea, poured without being asked, in a room that always smells faintly of mint and fresh bread. He thinks about the crack in the ceiling above his narrow bed, wider than the one at the Ravenlock estate, and somehow more familiar than any room he ever called his own before it. He thinks about the 2 drawings hanging on that wall, Maya's careful, crooked lines. One with a bright yellow sun even on a rainy day, because she draws things as they should be, not only as they are. He thinks about the table downstairs, the one that always feels a little too small whenever everyone tries to sit around it at once, and how that's exactly what makes it feel right. Somewhere behind them, the plane they left keeps healing quietly under fresh snow. No longer humming, no longer sick, simply ordinary Earth doing what ordinary Earth has always done. Somewhere ahead of them, through the falling snow, the gates of Coldford are finally starting to come into view. Somewhere behind them, far to the south, Sir Alden Marcroft is still riding under his own white cloak, still smiling his same gentle smile, still certain that Ian will eventually come around to seeing things the Crown's way. He doesn't know yet that the thing he wanted to control has already closed a 200-year-old wound without needing his gold, his laboratories, or his title at all. He will hear about it eventually, and when he does, the offer will change shape, softer at first, then sharper, because the capital rarely lets go of something useful without trying at least twice. But that's a fight for another season, and right now, none of the 6 people walking through the snow are thinking about the capital at all. Ian thinks instead about the choice he made standing at that rift. The same choice his ancestor never got offered, or maybe simply never took. Become a weapon, the cult's leader had said. Become what the Ravenlocks were always meant to be. Ian had said no, not because he lacked the power to say yes, but because he'd already learned, village by village, well by well, that healing a wound matters more than winning a war ever could. His grandfather never got the chance to make that choice. His father never got the chance either. Dying quiet and unnoticed in 3 empty rooms at 43 years old, Ian got the chance, and he spent it exactly the way he wanted to, kneeling in the snow beside people who chose to kneel there with him. He thinks about the letters still folded somewhere in Lyra's manuscript, proof that 2 houses built a crime together, and only one of them was ever punished for it. That imbalance won't undo itself overnight, and Siren knows it better than anyone walking this road, which is exactly why she keeps choosing to stay 3 steps behind, instead of walking away from what her family did. Ian doesn't know if 2 houses bound by an old crime can ever fully balance the scale, but he knows that showing up, day after day, layer after layer, is the only kind of atonement that has ever actually meant anything to him. Snow keeps falling, softer now, the wind dying down as evening settles over the mark. The gray sky above Coldford looks exactly the way it looked the very first evening he rode in. Tired, pale, expecting nothing from anyone. Except now there's smoke rising steady from familiar chimneys. And somewhere behind one particular window, a kettle is almost certainly already on. Rin slows her pace just slightly, falling back to walk beside him instead of ahead. The closest thing to affection she seems willing to show out loud. Lyra finally lets one hand drop from the manuscript, flexing stiff, cold fingers, and allows herself, just for a moment, to look proud of what she's carrying. Hannah opens her eyes fully for the first time since the plane, and looks toward Coldford like she's looking at the first real home she's had into long years. Siren keeps her eyes forward, not on Ian, not asking for anything, simply walking toward whatever comes next with the same steady discipline she's shown every single day since she arrived. Eileen says nothing at all, because she doesn't need to, because the 2 of them have never needed many words to understand each other. And there, finally, through the last curtain of falling snow, the gates of Coldford stand waiting exactly where they always have. The guard at the gate is the same one who let him through 5 months ago, half convinced he was just another smart aleck who'd be gone within 2 weeks. He doesn't ask who and why this time. He simply steps aside, and something that might be respect crosses his tired face as the 6 of them pass through. Word has already traveled ahead of them, the way it always does in a town this small. And by the time they reach the main street, doors are opening one after another. No parade, no trumpets, just people stepping out into the snow, quiet watching. Some of them holding lanterns against the falling dark. An old woman from the herb shop next door presses a warm loaf into Eileen's hands without a word, and Eileen passes half of it straight to Ian without breaking stride. A soldier who once asked Ian to check on his mother's dying cows nods once, sharply, the kind of nod men give each other when words would only get in the way. The blacksmith's boy runs alongside them for half a block, staring at Ian's gray temples like he's trying to memorize every detail to tell his friends later. Holt walks a little apart from the group now, one hand resting on Maya's shoulder. guiding her gently through the gathering crowd toward the barracks in warmth and rest. He catches Ian's eye once across the street and simply nods, the same heavy, wordless thank you he offered months ago over 2 mugs of strong drink. Ian nods back and understands that some debts are never meant to be settled out loud, only carried quietly, the way both of them already know how to carry things. Ren peels off toward the barracks without any goodbye at all, because goodbyes were never her language. And everyone who knows her understands that leaving quietly is its own kind of promise to come back. Lyra pauses at the corner, manuscript still held tight against her chest, and says she needs to find candlelight and a clean page before she loses a single detail of tonight. Hannah simply keeps walking beside Ian, unhurried, the way someone walks when they've finally stopped being lost. Siren slows near the edge of the square, uncertain, the old habit of not knowing whether she's allowed to follow still sitting heavy on her shoulders. Ian glances back at her just once and says nothing, but doesn't tell her to stop walking either. And she takes that, correctly, as an answer. Snow keeps drifting down over Coldford's rooftops, soft, endless, gathering in the same familiar corners it always gathers in every winter. Smoke rises straight up from a dozen chimneys into a sky finally free of any rumble beneath it. Ian's legs are shaking with exhaustion by the time the street narrows toward the herbalist's shop, but every single step still feels lighter than the one before it. The shop window glows warm and yellow against the falling dark, exactly the way it has glowed every evening for the past 5 months, exactly the way home is supposed to look from the outside. And Eileen, walking just half a step ahead of him now, reaches out and pushes the door open first. Warmth hits him first, the smell of dried mint and old dust and something baking somewhere in the back. The narrow stairs creak the exact same way they've creaked every single night for 5 months. 2 drawings still hang on the wall above his bed, Maya's crooked lines. One sun-colored bright yellow even on days it never once stopped raining. The crack in the ceiling is still there too, running from wall to wall like the bed of a dried-up river, exactly where he left it. Ian lowers himself onto the narrow bed, and for the first time in a week, nothing hurts quite as sharply as it did an hour ago. Eileen sets down water, a blanket, and a jar of something she's clearly been saving for exactly this moment, and doesn't ask a single question he isn't ready to answer. Downstairs, the small table is already filling up, 1 chair at a time. The same cramped table that's always felt too small for the number of people who insist on sitting around it anyway. Lyra arrives first with fresh candles and her manuscript, claiming the corner seat she's claimed every single evening since she first walked through that door. Rin slips in sometime later, saying nothing about where she's been, sitting exactly where she always sits, closest to the door, out of habit. Hannah settles cross-legged by the fire, quiet, present, looking, for the first time since Ian met her, like a woman who has finally stopped walking somewhere. Siren hovers near the doorway for a long moment before Eileen simply waves her toward an open chair, without making it into anything larger than it needs to be. Maya arrives last, breathless from running the whole way from the barracks, and climbs straight onto the bench beside Ian without asking permission from anyone. She holds out her hand. Ian reaches into his pocket and places the smooth river pebble back into her palm, warm again from carrying it the whole way home. She grins, the kind of grin that only an 8-year-old who is right about something can manage, and says she knew he'd come back. He tells her he never doubted it either. The table settles into the particular kind of noise a full room makes, when nobody is performing for anyone, just talking, just being there, elbow to elbow. Eileen moves toward the small stove in the corner, reaching for the kettle without needing to be asked, the way she's reached for it every single evening since the very first one. Ian watches her hands, the same weather-beaten hands that fastened his cloak at the edge of a 200-year-old wound, now simply pouring tea into a row of familiar, chipped mugs. No St. John's wort, just hot water, a sprig of mint, and a room full of people who chose, every single day, with their own eyes, to stay exactly where they are. She sets a mug down in front of him first, without a word, and moves on to the next person like it's the most ordinary thing in the world. Ian wraps both hands around the warm mug and feels the ache in his palms answer the heat. Sharp at first, then oddly comforting. He says thank you, quiet, and she nods without looking up, exactly the way she always has. Lyra reads a passage from the manuscript out loud, just to hear how it sounds spoken instead of written. And Ren snorts at one particular line and gets teased for it immediately. Hannah laughs, actually laughs, a soft sound none of them have heard from her before tonight. And it changes her whole face. Siren stays quiet, mostly listening, learning the particular rhythm of a table she's never sat at before, one built on choice instead of obligation. Maya falls asleep sitting upright against Ian's arm before the second mug of tea is even finished, the pebbles still clutched loosely in one small fist. Ian looks around the table slowly, one face at a time. The way he once looked at 12 strangers in a Holloway living room and felt nothing but distance. This room holds fewer people, and somehow it holds everything that room never did. He thinks about his grandfather, who never had a table like this one. He thinks about his father, who died alone in 3 quiet rooms without ever once being asked to stay for tea. He thinks about 23 years spent believing that being needed and being loved were two completely different things, and how wrong that belief turned out to be. Outside, the snow keeps falling over Coldford, steady, gentle. The same snow that finally settled clean, and even over a plane that used to burn for 200 years straight. Inside, the fire crackles low, the tea cools slowly in 6 chipped mugs. And for once in his entire life, Ian Ravenlock isn't thinking about someone else's pain at all. He's thinking about how good this particular mug of tea tastes, and how strange it feels to realize that this, exactly this, is what freedom was supposed to feel like all along. Somewhere far south, a white-cloaked commander is still riding toward a court that will want to know why its offer was refused twice in a row. Somewhere northeast, an old cult leader is still walking through fog, gray-eyed, poisoned, believing the war isn't finished just because one rift finally closed. Somewhere in a capital he no longer calls home, a golden hero named Cameron Ashton is still chasing monsters. He'll never quite understand the way Ian does. None of that reaches the small, crowded table tonight. Tonight, there's only tea, and firelight, and a sleeping child leaning against his arm. And 5 people who never had to be here, staying anyway. Ian doesn't know yet how many more rifts are waiting somewhere out past Holgrave. He doesn't know if the crown will send another white cloak within the month, or the year, or ever again at all. He doesn't know exactly how many years his own body is left to spend. But for the first time since he was 14 years old, none of that uncertainty feels like a curse he has to carry alone in silence. It feels, instead, like a life, messy and unfinished and entirely his own, waiting quietly for tomorrow. One by one, the candles burn low and the table finally starts to empty. Lyra gathers her manuscript gently, tucking it under one arm like something newly born, and heads upstairs to the small room she's claimed as her own. Ren disappears into the night without a goodbye, the way she always does. Though tonight she pauses at the door just a second longer than usual before stepping out. Hannah stays by the fire a while longer, murmuring something low in a language none of them know, before finally curling up on a blanket near the hearth. Siren rises last among the guests, hesitating near the door, unsure, as always, of how much space she is allowed to take up in this particular room. Eileen tells her, simply, that there's a spare blanket by the stairs if she wants to stay out of the cold tonight, instead of walking back alone. Siren nods, quiet, grateful, and settles into the corner without another word needed between them. Holt carries a sleeping Maya home through the snow, her small arms looped loosely around his neck, the pebbles still clutched safely in one fist. And slowly, the shop grows quiet, the fire settling into low embers, the last mug of tea finally going cold on the table between 2 people who don't need to fill the silence with anything at all. Eileen sits down across from Ian, sleeves still rolled to her elbows even now, and simply looks at him for a long moment. He looks back. Neither of them says anything for a while, and neither of them needs to. Outside, the snow keeps falling over Coldford, soft and steady, covering the tracks of 6 people who walked across a dying plane together and came home whole. He thinks about the man who stood in a Holloway living room 5 months ago and let a ring hit the table without saying a single word in his own defense. That man is still here, somewhere underneath the gray hair and the scorched hands. But he isn't a shadow anymore, and he never really was one, not once. Not for a single day of those 9 silent years. He was simply a man nobody had bothered to look at closely enough to see. Now, in a small room that smells of mint and dust and fresh bread, surrounded by people who looked and stayed and chose him back, he finally lets himself believe that. And that belief, quiet as it is, changes something in him that 9 years of silence never managed to touch. Eileen finally speaks, asking if he's staying up a while longer or heading to bed. He says a while longer. She nods and pours the last of the hot water into his mug without needing to be asked twice. He wraps both scarred hands around the warmth, and for once, doesn't think about tomorrow's work at all. He just sits there, in a room that finally, truly, feels like his. And outside, the snow keeps falling over a town that once called him nothing more than a stranger passing through. Somewhere behind that quiet, a town that now calls him something else entirely. Neighbor, friend, family in every sense that word was ever supposed to mean. And somewhere behind all of that, a 200-year-old wound finally, quietly closed. But this story isn't finished yet, not by a long stretch. Because a mug of tea, a full table, and a home worth defending were never the end of Ian Ravenlock's road. They were only ever the beginning of it. And what happens next starts the very moment the snow stops falling. Winter holds Coldford for 3 more months, long and gray and heavy with snow. But for the first time in 10 years, it doesn't feel like a siege anyone's losing. By late winter, word of the closed rift has spread through every village Ian ever set foot in, carried mouth to mouth faster than any royal messenger could manage. Farmers who once watched their cows die without explanations start noticing something else entirely. Wells running clear, grass growing green again in patches that had stayed gray for years. The old woman with the cloudy eyes, the shepherd who read his flock like a map, the stubborn miller who once called curse breakers charlatans, all of them keep watch now, exactly as Ian taught them. None of them are gifted the way a Ravenlock is gifted, but every single one of them can tell when a stone turns cold in their palm, and that's often enough to catch a wound before it festers. Spring arrives late that year, but it arrives, and it arrives everywhere at once. Not just around Coldford, all across the mark. In villages Ian never even had time to visit himself. The land is healing the way land heals when the poison at its root finally stops flowing, slowly, unevenly, but steadily, season after season. In the capital, Holt's letters finally get an answer, not from the chancellery this time, but from the crown itself, acknowledging what 23 previous heroes never managed to accomplish in 10 years combined. The king offers Ian the Ravenlock name back in full, lands, a title, a proper place at court, the very recognition his grandfather spent a lifetime hoping for and never received. Ian writes back a short letter of his own, thanking the crown, and respectfully declining every part of the offer except one: official protection for Coldford's garrison and the villages under its care. He asks for supplies instead of gold, for trained healers instead of metals, for the crown to fund the very kind of detection network he's already been building for free, with nothing but stones and stubbornness. It isn't the answer the court expects from a man offered everything his bloodline ever wanted, but it is exactly the answer everyone in Coldford already knew he'd give. Sir Alden Marcroft has returned, once more, that following autumn, smile intact, offer slightly reshaped, protection dressed up a little differently than before. Ian says no again, just as quietly as the first time. And this time Marcroft doesn't even bother arguing, because word of a closed 200-year rift travels faster than any order's ambition can keep up with. The Order of the Bright Blade eventually stops sending riders north altogether, not because they've given up on Ian, but because Coldford has quietly become the kind of place even the capital is careful not to provoke. Cameron Ashton keeps riding through the southern counties, still slaying monsters, still collecting ballots, and somewhere along the way word reaches him too about a well in Westmore he never noticed needed cleaning. He never comes north to check it himself, and Ian never expects him to, because some men are built to swing swords, and it was never really Cameron's fault that nobody ever taught him to look down. Siren stays through the spring, and the summer after that, hands no longer soft, voice no longer cracking. The Holloway lullaby finally sung the way it was always meant to be sung, in service of the land, not in service of a crown. She and Ian never quite become what they once were, and they never quite become strangers either. Something new grows between them instead, slower, harder one, built one honest year at a time instead of one broken promise. He doesn't know, even a year later, exactly what to call what they have, but he knows it's real, chosen fresh each morning instead of assumed the way an engagement once was. And that difference means more to him than any title ever could. Lyra's book grows past its first volume within the year. Copies handwritten by her own steady script and sent to garrisons across the northern counties. One careful stack at a time. She never returns to Baron Redmond's quiet library. And she never once looks back at the 2 years she spent playing the lute to walls. That couldn't hear her. Instead, she builds something that outlives every single generation of Ravenlocks who came before her. A system anyone with patience and a steady hand can actually learn from. Ring keeps her knives sharp and her roots memorized, guiding new detection teams through territory she once walked completely alone, with nothing but instinct and a scout's stubborn eye. Her clan, far to the north, eventually hears what she's done, and for the first time in her life, the word empty stops following her name from village to village. She never goes back to them, not because she's still angry, but because she's finally found people who never once called her empty to begin with. Hannah stays through the following winter, teaching Ian and Siren both the southern method her burned monastery once guarded so carefully, guiding instead of only absorbing, sealing instead of only carrying. She writes to what few surviving sisters of the Silent Chalice she can still find scattered across the continents, inviting them north to help rebuild something new out of what the Singing Ashes destroyed. Slowly, one letter at a time, a handful of them start arriving. Quiet women in gray habits who know exactly how to guide a wound closed, without needing to carry the whole weight of it themselves. Maya grows an inch taller by the following spring, still drawing every single day. Red dots and blue dots and green ones marking a map of a mark that keeps getting a little healthier. With every passing season, she still keeps a smooth river pebble in her pocket, though it's a different one now. One she found herself. The way Ian taught her curse breakers should always find their own first tool. Holt keeps commanding the Coldford garrison, though the tingling in his men's teeth has finally stopped, and for the first time in a decade, he sleeps through most nights without dreaming of dying sergeants. He writes fewer reports to the capital now, not because there's less to report, but because for the first time, someone up north is actually listening back. Eileen's shop stays exactly where it's always been, small, cluttered, smelling permanently of mint and dust and, more often than not now, fresh bread baking somewhere in the back room. She keeps teaching anyone who walks through her door willing to learn, the way Ian once taught her, patiently, without condescension, treating a farmer's question with the same seriousness as a scholar's. Ian himself keeps working, village by village, well by well, exactly the way he always has. Except now he rarely works entirely alone anymore. Some days it's Wren beside him, reading the ground. Some days it's Siren, singing low enough to test a note against a suspicious patch of earth. Some days it's a young detection team from 3 villages over, stones in their palms, watching his hands the way Maya once watched them, trying to learn exactly how he does it. His body keeps aging faster than it should, the cough never quite leaving him. His joints still aching worse every winter than the one before. The price of his bloodline never fully forgiven. But he no longer measures his life only in years left before it ends. He measures it in wells cleared, in children who wake up instead of fading, in a table back in Coldford that's still always a little too crowded, and always exactly full enough. Word of the truth in that 200-year-old letter never becomes public. Not because Ian wants it buried, but because Siren herself insists on carrying that weight openly instead of hiding behind her family's polished name. She writes to her own parents that winter, telling them everything Lyra found in that old chest, and the silence that follows lasts for months before a single reply ever comes back north. When her mother finally does right, it isn't an apology, and it isn't forgiveness either. It's simply an acknowledgement, cold and formal, that the Holloway name owes a debt it spent centuries pretending didn't exist. Siren reads that letter once, folds it carefully, and keeps working anyway. Because she's learned by now that some debts get paid one honest day at a time, not with a single grand gesture. The Holloway estate itself stays exactly where it's always stood, golden and polished and comfortable, and Siren stops missing it somewhere around her second full winter in Coldford's cold, cramped little shop. Cameron eventually marries someone else entirely, a merchant's daughter from the capital who admires his metals without ever once asking what actually happened underneath the villages he saved. Ian hears about the wedding secondhand from a passing trader, and feels nothing sharper than a distant, quiet relief that some part of his old life has finally closed its own door for good. The white streak that once marked his ring finger for 7 straight years is long gone by then. Tanned over, evened out, nothing left to mark where an old promise used to sit. In its place, faint white scars trace across both his palms instead, permanent, earned. The kind of mark no ring could ever compare to. Every villager who's ever watched him work knows exactly what those scars mean, and not a single one of them ever mistakes him for a shadow again. 2 years after the rift closed, a new detection network stretches across nearly every village within 3 days of Coldford. Farmers and shepherds and millers all trained to catch a wound in the land before it ever reaches a child's bedside. It isn't perfect. New corruption still surfaces sometimes, small, manageable, caught early enough now that it rarely grows past a single village before someone sends word north. Ian still travels constantly, still comes home exhausted, still pays a price with his own body every single time he pulls something old and heavy out of the ground. But he no longer travels alone, and he no longer comes home to an empty room with nothing but a crack in the ceiling for company. He comes home to Eileen's tea, to Maya's newest drawing pinned proudly beside the last one, 2 Wren sharpening knives by the fire, to Lyra's quill scratching steadily against fresh paper, to Hannah's quiet murmured blessings, to Siren's voice humming low over a suspicious patch of ground somewhere out past the garrison walls. He comes home, every single time, to a table that's always a little too crowded and somehow always exactly enough. Remember the question this story opened with: whether the man everyone once called weak was actually the only reason a whole family slept peacefully for 9 straight years. The answer, it turns out, was never complicated at all. He was never weak. He was simply carrying something no one else was willing to look at closely enough to see. And the moment he finally stopped carrying it in silence, he didn't lose everything the way anyone in that living room might have expected. He found exactly what he'd been missing the entire time, people willing to see him clearly and choose him anyway without a single curse forcing their hand. There's a particular kind of strength that never gets sung about in ballads, the kind that doesn't kill a monster in front of a cheering crowd, the kind that simply shows up, day after day, quietly doing the unglamorous work no one else wants to do. It's the strength of sitting beside a sick child until she opens her eyes again. It's the strength of teaching a stranger to test her own well water, instead of hoarding that knowledge for yourself. It's the strength of saying no to gold and a title and a crown's protection, because none of that was ever the thing you actually wanted. It's the strength of staying in a chair all night beside someone sick, pretending to be asleep, so they can cry without an audience. It's the strength of admitting the truth to the person who hurt you most, not to punish them, but because you finally deserve to stop carrying it alone. Ian Ravenlock never became the weapon the Colt wanted, and he never became the polished hero the Capitol tried to make of him either. He became something rarer than both of those, a man who chose, every single day, exactly who he wanted to be, instead of who his bloodline, his engagement, or his own quiet suffering had always told him he had to be. And maybe that's the real twist this story was building toward the whole time, not a hidden power, not a secret identity, not a grand reveal meant to shock anyone watching. Just an ordinary man choosing an extraordinary kind of honesty, one well, one village, one table at a time. The curse that started this whole story is gone now, sealed 200 years after it was first cast. Healed the same patient way every wound in this story was ever healed, slowly, deliberately, layer by layer, never rushed. The people who healed it are still healing too, each in their own way, each carrying their own old wounds a little lighter now than they used to. And somewhere in a small northern town that most maps still don't bother naming properly, a kettle is almost certainly on the stove again tonight, waiting for a table that's always a little too crowded to fill back up. That, in the end, is the whole story. Not a shadow anymore. Never really a shadow at all. Just a man who finally let himself be seen and found to his own quiet surprise. That being seen was never the danger he always assumed it would be. It was the cure. Picture Coldford, 3 years after that snowy afternoon on the plain. The garrison walls freshly repaired, the streets a little busier than they used to be. New families have started moving in instead of fleeing out, drawn by rumors of a town where the water runs clear and the crops actually grow the way crops are supposed to grow. The infirmary at the end of the main street rarely sits full anymore. Mostly broken bones and winter fevers now, the kind of ordinary sickness every healthy town deals with. Maya Barrow, 11 years old now, still visits Eileen's shop most afternoons, though these days she comes to teach the younger children instead of only learning herself. She keeps a small collection of river stones lined up on a shelf by the window, each one labeled in careful handwriting with the name of the village where she found it. Captain Holt still commands the garrison, grayer now himself, though the constant tension that used to live behind his eyes has finally softened into something closer to contentment. He keeps Ian's very first report framed on his study wall, not the king's letter, not any medal, just the short note Ian left him about the mass grave under the barracks, proof of where all of this actually began. Rin still guides new scouts through the mark, training a small handful of quiet, sharp-eyed young women who remind her, she admits once, quietly, a little of who she used to be before anyone ever called her empty. Lyra's book has grown into 3 full volumes now, copied and recopied, sent as far south as the capital's own royal library, where scholars who once dismissed the Ravenlock name study it with something close to reverence. She still lives above Eileen's shop, in the small room across from Ian's, and still insists, whenever anyone thanks her, that it was never her. Only order applied to knowledge someone else already had. Nobody believes her anymore, and by now, she's mostly stopped arguing the point. Hannah's small handful of sister nuns has grown into an actual order again, housed in a modest stone building just outside Coldford's walls, teaching the guiding method to anyone willing to sit still long enough to learn it. She still murmurs that same quiet word in a language nobody else understands, whenever a rift finally closes clean, and by now, everyone in Coldford has simply learned to recognize it as her version of Amen. Siren's voice has become something the whole region knows about, not through ballads sung in the capital, but through quiet, practical work. Singing curses loose from wells and fields no crown ever bothered sending a hero to check. She writes to her mother once a season now, short letters, no request. Never apologies demanded in return, simply proof that she's still here, still working, still trying. Some seasons her mother writes back. Some seasons she doesn't. Siren keeps writing anyway, Because she's learned, slowly, that showing up consistently matters far more than being immediately forgiven. Eileen's shop has added a second room by now. Shelves lined with herbs on one side, curse detection supplies on the other. Exactly the kind of order Lyra always insisted every good system needs. She and Ian never make any grand announcement about what they are to each other. No ring, no ceremony, no formal declaration read out in front of 12 witnesses the way it happened once before. Instead, there's simply a second mug that's always waiting by the kettle before he even asks, and a chair that's understood without a single word needing to be said to be his. That third spring, Ian rides south for the first time since he left. Back to the old Ravenlock estate, back to the graves on the hill behind the church. The manor stands quiet and half forgotten, 3 rooms and a library and an empty stable. Exactly as he left it, gathering dust nobody's bothered to disturb. He doesn't stay long. He kneels at his father's grave first, and tells him, simply, that the family name finally means something different now, not fading quietly into silence, but working loudly out in the open, where anyone can see it. He kneels at his grandfather's grave next, and sets down a single copy of Lyra's finished manuscript, weighted with a stone, so the wind won't carry it off. Everything you knew, he tells the grave quietly. Everything you were too afraid or too tired to write down properly. Someone finally organized it, and it's already saving lives you'll never get to hear about. He doesn't cry at either grave, not from grief exactly, more from a strange, settled peace neither man buried there ever got the chance to feel while they were alive. On his way back north, he stops once more at the Holloway estate, though he doesn't go inside. He simply stands at the garden gate where he once placed his palm against wet stone, and felt something inside his chest finally let go for the very first time. The white streak is long gone from his finger by now, but the memory of that exact moment never fades, not once, not even 3 years later. He turns north again before anyone inside the house even notices he's been standing there at all, and rides the rest of the way back to Coldford without looking behind him. Not because there's nothing worth looking back at, because everything worth looking forward to is finally waiting for him instead, up ahead. Past the marsh, past the withering grass, past 3 days of road he now knows better than any other road in the kingdom. He arrives home at dusk, snow just starting to fall again, early for the season this year, and finds the shop window already glowing warm and yellow against the coming dark. Eileen looks up when the door opens, sleeves rolled to her elbows as always, and doesn't ask how the trip went. Not yet, because she can already see the answer settle quietly on his face. She simply pours him tea, hot, no St. John's wort, and sets it down without a word. The way she always has, the way she probably always will. He sits down at the table that's still somehow always a little too crowded, and wraps both scarred hands around the warmth. Maya burst in a few minutes later with a new drawing to show him. This one of the whole mark itself. Dozens of villages marked in careful green dots stretching farther than any single map used to show. Wren arrives not long after, saying nothing about where she's been, sitting exactly where she always sits. Lyra comes down from her room with fresh ink stains on her fingers, already talking about the 4th volume before anyone's even finished the 3rd. Hannah slips in quietly from the cold, murmuring her small blessing under her breath, settling by the fire like she's simply coming home from somewhere close by, instead of somewhere to continents away. Siren is the last through the door, snow dusting her shoulders, voice already humming some half-formed melody she's been testing against a well 3 villages over. She catches Ian's eye across the room, and for the first time in 3 years, neither of them looks away first. This is what a life actually looks like after the ballad ends, not silence, not an empty castle, not a single dramatic final battle that fixes everything overnight. It looks like a small room, slightly too crowded, filled with people who show up again and again, season after season, simply because they choose to. It looks like scars onto palms that never fully heal, worn not as a badge of suffering, but as quiet proof of every single person those hands ever helped. It looks like a child's drawing pinned to a wall, updated year after year, the green dot slowly spreading farther across a map that used to be almost entirely red. It looks like letters exchanged with a mother who may never fully forgive, sent anyway, season after season, because showing up matters more than being immediately understood. It looks like a manuscript growing thicker every single year, carrying knowledge forward instead of letting it die quietly with one man's memory, the way it almost always used to. It looks like an old, empty manor left standing quietly in the south, visited once a year, honored, but never again mistaken for home. Home, it turns out, was never a place built from stone and inherited titles at all. Home was always going to be wherever people chose to sit around the same crowded table, night after night, without a single curse forcing their hand. Ian Ravenlock spent the first 23 years of his life Believing love meant disappearing quietly so someone else could shine brighter in the light. He spent every year after that learning something far simpler and far harder to accept. Love was never supposed to cost him his own name. It was never supposed to demand his silence, his pain, his slow, invisible sacrifice, offered up night after night to someone who never once thought to ask why he was suffering. Real love, the kind he finally found in a small, cluttered herbalist shop at the edge of a dying land, never once asked him to disappear. It asked him to stay exactly as he was, scars and gray hair and dry cough included, and it stayed right there beside him in return. That, in the end, is the quiet, unglamorous truth this whole story was built to tell. Not that hidden power always saves the day. Not that a good enough twist can undo years of quiet suffering in a single dramatic instant, but that being truly seen fully, without flinching, by even a handful of people willing to stay, is worth more than any crown, any title, or any golden hero's applause ever could be. So if anyone ever tells you that quiet, patient people don't change the world, remember Ian Ravenlock kneeling in the snow, giving away years of his own life so his strangers well could run clear again. Remember Eileen Marsh, rolling up her sleeves every single morning for a man she barely knew, simply because she recognized someone worth staying for. Remember Wren, called empty by her own clan, becoming the sharpest, steadiest eyes an entire dying region ever had. Remember Lyra Wyndham, exiled out of boredom, turning 6 generations of forgotten scribbles into knowledge an entire kingdom would eventually come to rely on. Remember Hannah Cho, walking 2 years across 2 continents with nothing left but grief and purpose, and finding both a home and a new order to rebuild at the end of that long road. Remember Siren Holloway, who once called a man a shadow, and spent every single day afterward proving, patiently, that people can change if they're actually willing to do the work. Remember Maya Barrow, 8 years old and unconscious for months, waking up to become the next generation of exactly the kind of person this whole land desperately needed. Remember Holt Barrow, who held a garrison together for 10 silent years with nothing but stubbornness and love for his daughter, and who finally got to see that effort recognized. None of them needed a sword, a title, or a crown's blessing to matter. They needed each other, and the willingness to show up, again and again, one small crowded table at a time. That willingness is what closed a wound to centuries old. Not a weapon, not a war, not a hero riding in on a white horse to save the day at the very last possible second. Just ordinary people, choosing extraordinary patience, layer by layer, year after year, until the earth itself finally stopped hurting. Snow is falling over Coldford again tonight, soft, steady, settling clean, and even across rooftops that used to hum with pain beneath them. Inside one small, cluttered shop, a kettle is on, a table is crowded, and every single chair around it is filled by someone who chose, with their own 2 eyes, to be there. Ian Ravenlock isn't a shadow. He never really was. He's simply a man who was finally seen, and who, in being seen, learned exactly how to live. And that, more than any curse, any crown, or any 200-year-old war, is the story that was always worth telling. So the next time someone calls you quiet, or tired, or invisible, remember that some of the strongest people who ever lived were called exactly those same words first. Strength was never only the ability to swing a sword and win a crowd's applause. Sometimes strength is simply staying, night after night, beside someone who needs you, long after anyone else stopped looking. Sometimes it's teaching a stranger something you spent a lifetime learning, expecting absolutely nothing back in return. Sometimes it's telling the truth to the one person who hurt you most, not for revenge, but because you finally deserve to stop carrying it alone. And sometimes, the greatest twist a story can ever offer isn't a hidden power revealed at the perfect dramatic moment. It's an ordinary man finally choosing himself, his own name, his own worth, after years of believing he wasn't allowed to. Ian Ravenlock rode north as a shadow fleeing a broken engagement, carrying nothing but herbarium, a few rusty nails, and a quiet, aching hope that somewhere he might finally matter. He found far more than that. He found a garrison willing to defend him. He found a scout who never once called him weak. He found a chronicler who gave his family's forgotten knowledge a future. He found a nun who taught him healing was always stronger than any curse. He found a woman who chose to sing, once again, in the voice her own family tried to forget. He found an herbalist who poured him tea without ever once asking for anything back. He found a child who trusted him before he ever fully trusted himself. And in finding all of them, he finally stopped being a shadow and started, at long last, being simply, fully, unmistakably himself. That is the story of Ian Ravenlock. Not a hero remembered in ballads. Something rarer, and something far more lasting. A man who was finally completely seen. And that made all the difference in the world. So picture him now, one final time, sitting at that same small, crowded table. Snow falling softly outside the window. His hands are scarred, his temples are gray, and his cough never fully leaves him. Not even on the warmest summer nights. But his eyes are calm. His shoulders are relaxed. And the mug of tea in his hands is still warm. Around him sit the people who chose him, freely, again and again, without a single curse ever forcing their hand. A herbalist, a scout, a chronicler, a nun, a singer learning to use her voice for healing instead of harm, a child who still believes, completely, that he can fix almost anything. This is not the story of a shadow reclaiming his place in someone else's light. This is the story of a man who built his own light, one honest, patient day at a time, and who finally, fully, stepped into it. And that light, warm and quiet and entirely his own, was never going out again.